good afternoon, and welcome to Nkhani Zathu, our stories radio program. This program comes to you every Tuesday at 13:30 to 14 hours on Pan-African Radio, and Nkhani Zathu aims to bring in creators, writers, authors, producers, and other stakeholders to discuss matters aimed at narrative change, that is, in the arts and literary sector. Now, for someone that may not know, today is World Poetry Day. All around the world, people are celebrating the 21st of March being World Poetry Day. On this day, specifically, I would say is to honor our amazing poets, and that is why today, I, Rinah Kasongo, is glad to have Vanessa Chisakula on Nkhani Zathu. She's an amazing poet. You are in for a ride, I assure you, because we are commemorating and celebrating World Poetry Day in a particular style, in a very poetic style, if you ask me. Vanessa, welcome to Nkhani Zathu.
Thank you so much, Rinah.
Awesome. Someone that may not know you, just tell us who you are and what you do.
Okay, so my name is Vanessa Chisakula. I am a spoken word artist. I'm also an artivist, and I am currently the country coordinator for Word Smash Poetry Movement.
Okay, the word artivist, what is that?
It's a combination of activism and art. So instead of purely carrying out activism as plain as it can be, you carry it out in an artistic manner. And so as an artist, because I feel compelled to make a difference in my society, artivist was the best place where I could settle.
Alright, I like it. Artivist. Mostly we use the activist, but then there's artivist.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Word Smash Poetry. What is it about?
So Word Smash Poetry is a Southern African free expression movement. We lean on advocacy and human rights. We are twofold, but our main vision is to actually just enhance creative communication for social change. But we also seek to provide a platform for different types of activists, women human rights, environmental activists, whoever would love to find a space for them to express themselves. We are the people to go to.
Interesting. Now today, you know very well, obviously, that we are celebrating, it is World Poetry Day. For someone that may not know, what is World Poetry about?
So World Poetry Day is simply a day where we celebrate poetry movements and poets all over the world. Firstly, it was adopted by UNESCO, that was in 1999. And from then onwards, every year on the 21st of March, we get to celebrate, because there's always a new poet who's arisen. There are old poets who've done so much work, and we're taking time to just like indulge in all the work that they have done and to remind them that we celebrate you. So that is what this day is about.
And I think not just celebrating other poets, but even you are being celebrated. I would say
thank you.
Yeah, I would say we are celebrating you
Thank
being
you
a
so
poet.
much.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then I know there could be people that would just be like, I've always heard the term poetry, but I don't know what it is. So according to you, what exactly is poetry?
Wow, that poetry is really multifaceted. Let me see. What is the best definition that I can give it? This is an expressive art form that allows you to write in so many more different forms. We have different types of poetry that you can express yourself in. So the simplest definition that I would give to poetry is that it is just an expression of art through poems.
Through poems?
Yes.
Okay. Are there types of poetry, if any, and maybe what is your style of poetry?
There's so many types of poetry. There's free verse, which is my type, my go-to any day. I don't really succumb to so many poetry rules when I'm creating. I would rather a person gets to notice after a piece of mine is done and point out like, oh, this was talking to ABC, but I'm not intentional when I sit down to create, because I do not want to limit my expression. I just want to create what I love, and it can be judged on literal terms later. So I'm a free verse poet.
Free verse.
Yes.
And then what other styles or types of poetry are there?
So there are people who create haikus. There are people who, now that you just asked me types of poetry, and I'm thinking, I'm going back to a time when I was actually teaching little kids. There are people who create haikus. There are people who create sonnets. And yes, those are the two that have come out over my head.
So now, is the type dependent on how you're flowing or the kind of words?
It's the rules. So, like a haiku is a 3-5. No, I don't want to lie. What can I get close to right now? But it's dependent on the rules. Like, it's dependent on the rhymings. Like the sonnet, it's dependent on the rhymings. It's also dependent on the type of words that you infuse in it. So I will give an example with the most I'm familiar with, which is free verse. It's just there. It does not really adhere to rhymes. It does not talk about what literal rules or terms are you infusing in it. It's just written. It's just a piece of poetry, which is just as is. It does not conform to any rules. So depending on which rules you're actually adhering to, they would determine what type of poetry you are subscribing to at the moment.
That makes sense. You know, because I have a journal and I write certain words, and I think I'll just give it to you so I can just check to say,
wow.
I think this is free verse or whatnot. I could just be a poet, by the way. Yeah.
So especially if you look at today's theme, poetry is one form of art that I've actually come to appreciate, because it exists in so many forms, and it also sits in so many art disciplines, because movies can be poetic, songs can carry a lot of poetry, the books that we read. And so when you look at the theme today for this World Poetry Day, it says be a poet even in prose. It's simply emphasizing that we're celebrating your creativity and your being a poet regardless what art form you're practicing, because poetry really can exist in so many different art forms. Most of the great rappers, musicians of different genres that exist today started off as poets, and so they're just poetically arranging their lines into songs, and it's all poetry. Poetry is in everything that we're looking at right now. Everything beautiful, yeah, everything colorful.
You're already sounding poetic, by the way. Okay, do you have a favorite poem other than your own? Because I know you've written a number of poems.
Other than my own? Look at me. So there's this go-to poem that I always listen to. Other than, I don't even listen to myself, Rinah. So my go-to or favorite poem of all times is it's called I Will Wait by Genetics. So that poem is a complete piece of work. It's a masterpiece when I listen to it, and everything that it speaks of I can relate, and it is also very artistically rich, that even when I am experiencing writer's block, I can sit down, listen to it, and at least I'll get a few ideas. So it's called I Will Wait by Genetics. That's my favorite poem.
I Will Wait. Help to look it up.
You should. You will like it.
And then of your own writings, which one would you say, I love this?
It's like having kids. I don't want to pick a favorite. The others might not like it. But I'm a bit conflicted. I think for me, Africana is one of the poems that I am going to perform the most in my life because it's my go-to poem.
Okay.
And yeah, I think it would only be fair to rate it as my favorite amongst my work.
So just hold that thought. Because I now wanted you to ask, can you recite that favorite poem for us? Because one have just a little bit of that Africana as well.
Now?
You can say 30 seconds from now.
30 seconds from now.
Yeah.
Do we have a clock so that we count down to this?
We will count down. We will count down. But anyway, moving forward, when did you start poetry and why?
So my story is the poet's common story. I was upset. I needed a place to vent, and my art has actually come in as more therapy than it has been a money-making venture. So this is where I say what I want to say, the way that I wanted to say, and you can take it or leave it. And in the process, I started to realize that I can actually easily heal off from so many things just by writing poems. Because I was in a bad space when I was starting out.
What age was that?
How old was I? I can't remember.
I think you would want to remember. For the sake of that, I don't know if it was in your teenage years and someone would want to relate, say, I'm going through that and this is how I'm able to ease my emotions and whatnot.
So since I have always wanted to write, I think my interest started when I was already 20. I actually regret starting late. I would have loved to start earlier, but I was still writing so many other things. It's just that poetry came in as an aha moment, where you go like, what? So I can do this, because I didn't know that I could do it. And so I was already in my 20s, and I think I started taking it seriously when I was 23, 4 somewhere. That's when I started to realize that, this can actually be my life. I can actually start doing this.
Interesting.
Yeah, and here we are now.
So you're now ready to do that Africana piece? You could just give us a little bit so that,
Okay, cool.
Alright. Whenever you're ready.
We hail from the land of the sun. We are the natural bred warriors. We are the children of the savannas, the rivers, the mountains, the deserts, the valleys. We're the keepers of our grandparents' stories. If Wakanda is something new to you, we have lived our lives with the spirit of a Black Panther. This is the blood of Shaka. This soil. This is a soil that birthed greats like Utata Madiba, and we cannot run away from the great musicianship or unique artistry of legends Lucky Dube, Oliver Mtukudzi, Pongozi, Fela Kuti. We are Africans. We house the most minerals. We have the platinum, the aluminium, the silver, and the gold. All the way from the copper belt up to the city of gold. Why do you think they scrambled for Africa? We are a world that exists within a world. Thank you.
But is that like part 2?
That was an excerpt.
Okay. All right. Nice.
Thank you.
I genuinely appreciate your poetry.
Thank you.
Which now leaves me to wondering, how do you come up with these pieces? Are they based on your life experiences or circumstances or people around you? Because they're quite relatable stories, by the way. I was looking at, I was watching one of your pieces today. That was something about what the enemy.
The enemy within.
Yes, that one. So I'm like, how did she come up with that?
So it's always different. Like the scenario is always different. The inspiration is always different. Sometimes it's based on what I'm reading. Sometimes it's based on how I'm just feeling. Like Enemy Within was definitely just out of my emotions. I was like, I'm seeing so much of this. Let me write it, and I wrote it. Recently, I wrote a poem. Don't ask me to recite it.
I won't.
So it's called Mother, and I've been reading a compilation of excerpts from Chinua Achebe's writings, and they were put in a very tiny book. I got it from Grey Matter. It's just 20 kwacha. And this book, I read it. I think I read it 3 times. I kept on reading it, and when I was done, I came up with this this poem called Mother. So that book had so much impact on me that it made me generate that piece. Africana also is one of the pieces that came after deep reflection on how at a certain point I wasn't proud to be an African when I was young, because I thought we're missing out on so much. Like, we're on the part of the world where things are not happening and stuff like that. And also being bullied because of being dark, and my complexion being linked to my voice, because some people be like, your voice is so big, you sound like a boy.
It's big and beautiful.
So when I was writing Africana, I was mostly trying to convince myself, or rather reintroduce myself and say, I'm African, it's fine, I accept it, it's okay, I like it, and you have a misconception of who we are, this is us. And so that's how it came about, and that's how come it's even a chapbook. And so inspiration just comes from different places, very, very different places. Sometimes I do not even expect to get any sort of inspiration, and there it just happens.
I think it's the story of almost every creative
Yeah.
and artist out there. Yeah. Speaking of Africana and being African, there's so much of that in your poetry, like you representing the African identity. And I understand that you've had the opportunity to interact, perform your poetry in different parts of the world, if I would say. How has your poetry been received by people from different parts of the world?
I think the reception has been great. Oh, yeah.
Or better to put it, what has been the impact of that representation of Africanness to different people around the world?
I mean, people, it's been okay overall. And when they see you dress up, you step on stage and you start talking, some just find it cute and like, oh my god, you're from Zambia, oh, I liked what you did. And some deeply just relate to these stories, because in as much as I try to sound, not try, in as much as I work towards sounding African, I also remember to sound human. So most themes I pick really universal themes, where a woman in Australia, a woman in Canada should feel how I'm feeling, because at the end of the day, before we become Africans, we're just humans. So we're all subscribing to that before we start to fall into our tiny circles of our identities. And I say this because when I did Enemy Within, I got some people. I mentioned Australia because that's the first person that came to my head when I was remembering people who really came knocking at my door and wanting to hear more. Was this lady from Australia who came and said, wow, I related because I'm going through ABC. And so even on the stages that I have stepped on, in as much as I would want to bring out the African story, I'm just trying to tell you we're so alike. And yes, this happens in Africa, but I think at a certain point it does happen in what country? Can I mention? It does happen in Brazil. It does happen where you are. And so relatability first, to be human, to speak the human language, and unintentionally, because of that authenticity that you're carrying, it is linking you and tying you back to your roots. So sometimes I'm not even there to just say Africa, Africa, but I'm just saying things and somebody can find it easy to link me back home. Yeah.
Speaking of how you put these words together, I find myself always like, it's like you're triggering a certain emotion within me when I'm so do you do that intentionally, like I'm gonna speak with this energy, or I'm gonna add this word so that people will be triggered by this and feel angry or feel warm in their heart? Explain to us, like, is it intentional that you make us get triggered, with our emotions?
If I knew what words would trigger people, then I would use them all the time. No, it's simply me being real and just saying things as they are. I take my art as a ministration. So this is ministry. This is me ministering to a soul, and I take it so seriously that I would love to be a vessel that God can actually use to reach out to the next person. And so my prayer has always been to be a relevant voice to someone. And when I hear that, this emotion was triggered, I'm actually glad.
Yeah, you better be glad, because
okay, it's working. But there's really there are recipes, of course. Like I told you, there are rules. There's everything you can use. There's a way you can write to sound like ABC. But really, when it jumps out of a page and gets to touch a real person, I think I'm not in control anymore. That's bigger than me too. So if somebody just comes and says, your poem made me feel a certain way and want to do certain things, I'm actually glad that both of us are benefiting from that. Yeah. Me, the artist, I'm doing this duty, and you're receiving it in that way. So it's a win-win.
It's definitely
but
a win-win.
It's totally out of my control. I'm just creating.
Yeah. Okay. I like how authentic and relatable your poetry is. I'll say it again. Now, what are the challenges and opportunities of poetry in Zambia?
Okay. I'll start with the challenges. I think platforms. Poets just want to be heard. They want to step on stage. So sometimes there might not be many platforms readily available. And also the other challenge, I think, that we have been trying to stand in the gap towards this one at Word Smash is mentorship. I think not everybody is going to wake up and just be courageous and say, I'm doing this no matter what. Some people need someone to sit under. And I really give kudos, like, to the poets at Word Smash. I would like to call out Bekumusa Moyo and Jerry Sikazwe, because I have seen them dedicate a lot of time in actually helping out so many poets that have come up in Zambia. And so I think just that gap of mentorship, and also the same poets realizing that they need the mentorship. So it's mentorship, it's platforms, and then also the other challenge is actually the art being taken seriously to a level where people actually see the need to pay for it. Because most of the times they think, this is for fun. You like doing this, come, let me give you a stage and you can do it. And so that's one other challenge, and there can be many more anyway. But jumping to opportunities, when we see that there are no platforms, it actually gives us the opportunity to be as creative as we can, to jump into so many spaces where people think this cannot fit, and we open up their eyes to say, this actually belongs here. And that's, I'll go back to Word Smash again, that's something that we pride ourselves in, because we when we started doing poetry for civil society or corporates, we don't know anyone who's doing it then. So we took a bold step. It was a leap of faith. We're like, okay, let's explore this space. Let's talk governance. Let's try to trigger people into thinking about civic participation. What if I mention an election, or I say Mr. President in my poem? How is it going to be received? And so we sort of tried to bring it in, and we trailblaze in that path. And so that's one of the biggest opportunities, and there are many more. There's so many more spaces also willing to take up points locally and internationally, regionally, however you may want to look at it.
Okay, are there some, for the sake of someone who may be curious to find out, what could be some of these platforms ready to take up poets?
There are so many civil society organizations that are ready to work with poets today that I have personally been in those spaces and have seen that there is that gap. There are corporates now. I know that Zanaco is working with women. I think that's APSA also. So there are so many platforms. I can call out so many organizations that are making room for poets right now, that are making room for me and many other poets that I see having work.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think just to add on, one opportunity could be that how you've made use of social media.
Definitely.
Your YouTube is quite good, I must say. I think
Thank you.
It's better anyway. Not really brilliant, but better than by brilliant someone would think she's reached, she's there. But it's good enough where someone would say, okay, people have genuinely been following the content. And I think it's maybe a recommendation for other poets out there that may not know how they could be documenting some of their works and people to see. But I think you've done quite a good job, and you've been quite deliberate about it.
When you mention social media, Rinah, I think that's really brilliant, and so many poets should really look into that, because we are in a moment of globalization, and there is really nothing like this is just for Zambia, this is for Malawi, this is just for Zimbabwe. We are just, we're there. You throw something on social media, someone in China can actually see it maybe before a person in South Africa. So it's really important, yes, for poets out there to utilize social media, because we're in this era and we cannot even try to ignore that this is a time for technology. It's taking over.
Yeah, that is true. And do you have any final remarks as we, wind up?
Any final remarks? Wow, that's a hard task.
I thought it would be the easiest coming from a poet.
You think? So, okay, for this World Poetry Day, I would just like to wish every wordsmith out there a happy World Poetry Day. Keep creating. The world needs to hear your voice. Then there can never be enough voices. There can never be enough stories told. And yeah, so we need you.
Awesome stuff. Wow. And you've done quite good. You said that was going to be hard, but it came out naturally as always. And that's a wrap on Nkhani Zathu. This is what we do. We bring in creators, writers, authors, producers, and other stakeholders to reflect the Zambian and African identity. Be sure to tune again next week, same time, which is 13:30 to 14 hours on Pan-African Radio. Sochen Publishers and Pan-African Radio collaborate to bring Nkhani Zathu to life, and this is what we have for you. But remember also, Nkhani Zathu is currently open for sponsorship and any form of partnership, so be sure to reach out on 0763 465255 and explore ways in which we can take this further. Until next time, I have been your host, Rinah Kasongo. Have a pleasant afternoon.